Although I am firmly on the anti-woke side of things politically, right? I'm about as anti-woke as you can possibly get. There is no denying that the sexually charged, degenerate era of early 2000s gaming was, for the most part, deplorable, right? Onichibara sucked, right? Games like Lollipop Chainsaw were disappointing, right? There were good examples of games that had sexual elements and things like that. No More Heroes comes to mind, but there is a very good reason why a lot of this was made fun of and derided, right? A lot of it is tacky, a lot of it like hides shallow gameplay. The target audience are incels, right? There are reasons for normal people to shit talk games like this, okay? Like, again, it's perfectly normal and it should be encouraged, right? Like, there's nothing wrong with making fun of this kind of material, okay? So, with that in mind, with that being said, one of the weird things that has come about in this whole like anti woke era is that people tend to glamorize that past, right? People tend to worship like, absolute garbage that nobody really cared about. Um, there are lots of examples, but I think the big one that really gets me that has come up recently are the original God of War games because right now there's talk of a re-release going around, right? They're gonna remake these games and they're gonna like do things to them and like upscale and stuff like that. And immediately certain circles began talking about censorship, right? What are they gonna censor in God of War? Are they gonna remove the sex mini games? Are they gonna remove like the sacrificing Poseidon's concubine? Are they going to like change some puzzles or what have you? Like people are freaking out over like the idea of censoring God of War, the manliest game ever. And I would like to take the opportunity to come out and say that God of War was never good. Kratos was not a cool character. God of War was not a well presented, mature story. It was complete garbage and took a lot of liberties with Greek mythology and culture. Okay, it was abominably bad when you compare it to like its inspiration, Devil May Cry, and what would come after it. Ninja Gaiden and Bayonetta, right? God of War at the time was rightfully derided for being a very shallow, boring action game that was carried entirely by shock value. Okay, but game journals did not want to admit it because this was a major PlayStation exclusive. So for the first couple of releases, people were completely on board with Kratos being as brutal as possible, banging multiple chicks at once, ripping people's heads off, killing people for no reason. Kratos was the man. Oh, he's the strongest character in all of gaming. Oh, he would totally kill any other video game character in a fight because, ooh, he beat Zeus. Ooh, he beat Hades. Ooh, he killed the gods of Olympus. Ooh, he's so angry. Like, Kratos is like essentially a parody of the kind of edgy bullshit that people have nostalgic memories of for without any real like consideration for just why that character was made, why it was popular, and why it faded away, right? Because at its core, Kratos is not an interesting character, right? He's not engaging. He's not fun to play. He's not cool to look at, right? He's not particularly powerful, right? Like the entire series coasts off this idea that you are the ultimate badass, blowing down wave after wave of monsters and pulling all these crazy stunts. Like, and you're so tortured, and you take out your rage on other people, and you're an incredible person. Like, and it's just like it just comes off as really shallow, especially if you're like someone who actually is even vaguely familiar with actual Greek mythology, right? This idea that like Kratos just goes on this unstoppable rampage, goes completely against the idea of eventually having some tragic fall, right? Instead, he just keeps winning and winning and winning because like, ooh, that Kratos is just so strong, guys, and it just completely it doesn't have any real impact to it. You don't care, and eventually it gets repetitive. Even by the time God of War 3 came out, even game journos who worshipped God of War 1 and 2 were starting to turn around and say that, like, the spectacle is there, but I'm starting to get bored of it, right? It suffered from the typical PlayStation trilogy cycle, in which people overhyped the game, like right from the get-go, claim the second one is even better, and then by the third one, like all the cracks start forming and people start to lose interest. And that's when like the spin-offs start getting made and like the characters start becoming a joke, right? It happened to Crash, it happened to like Spyro, Jack and Daxter, right? Like, and it happened to God of War, right? God of War never really established itself as a gaming IP. It was big and popular because Sony said it should be big and popular. It did these shocking things in order to emphasize that, like, oh, video games aren't for kids anymore, with no real regard to the characterization or the world or like what it means for the story, right? Like everything that happens in God of War purely happens for shock value. It has no real thought put into it, and things just kind of happen. And if you play these games, even like the most brain dead like YouTube streamer shill will start to see through it and get tired of it. And that's one of the reasons why like the remake duology is so interesting, because it directly addresses these issues that people had with the character. That like, oh, he's too violent and unhinged. Well, we have to have him go through a redemption arc. And so this led to like the woke soy boy DEI infested just opposite take, in which like Kratos regrets what he did and is going along this path to redemption, and it just doesn't work. It rings hollow, right? It just doesn't feel like a natural progressive story, even the natural progression of a story. It's just something that people, the developers, made up in order to justify continuing the IP, continuing the franchise, like keeping people hyped and invested. When like in reality, it's just very shallow. It doesn't really go anywhere, and it's just like it is just a cheap attempt at trying to appease people's complaints about the character, right? So again, like Kratos was never a good, interesting character, but because of that, the fact that they tried to completely change him in order to like appease these people, it doesn't make them good writers or show that they care about the franchise or the brand. It just means that they're like trying to take advantage of you, right? They're trying to establish this trend of like completely changing characters and trying to sell them as like, well, this is just who the character is now. And like, yeah, both the old God of War games and the new God of War games are bad, right? Like they just don't mesh together very well at all, right? Like they don't have good mechanics, they don't have good stories, they don't have good characters. Like no matter how the games develop or what the developers do, they are never ever ever going to be able to match even like a below average Japanese action game. Right? They will never reach the heights of like Bayonetta or like Platinum Games or Capcom or any of these other games like Konami, right? Like God of War was always a mid franchise that sold itself on this idea that you were some ultra hardcore badass, and you're just not. Like you're not cool, you're not interesting. Like Kratos is just a lame, boring character. Like, and that's all it comes down to. And people do need to accept that, right? People need to accept that God of War faded from the public consciousness for a reason, right? Much like Halo, it was a brand that sold itself based on this idea that gaming was mature now without having any real merits to back it up.